Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the Market Mindset. Today's take. This is a random walk through commodities and mining stocks in particular. Today, we're going to deviate a little bit. Silver and gold are still doing great. We're very optimistic. And everything we do centers around mining because we want to be that bridge between those that don't like the current narrative about the energy transition and those that maybe are too on the absurd side of the narrative of the energy transition, and ride that fine line of nuance to try to meet somewhere in the middle where everyone can agree that, listen, clean air, having a bit of an energy transition solves whatever specific needs that they want. And I think it's possible. That it seems challenging in this age of division, which kind of sells, but I think it's possible. And we're going to do it under the heading today of the McKinsey report that just came out, their Global Materials Perspective 2024. But before we jump into that, just a couple of news pieces that are good to hear. I'd meant to mention it on Wednesday, but Fortescue and Liebherr expanded their green equipment partnership. I believe it's $2.8 billion US in new green electric vehicles, 360 autonomous battery electric trucks, 55 electric excavators, 60 battery powered dozers. That's going to replace like 2/3 of their current fleet. That's an enormous cost. They're the world's fourth largest iron ore miner, Fortescue. So to see them really picking it up and showing that it can be done, I mean, this is great. It's a big cost for them, But whether you want to look at that as just simply they're doing the right thing for doing the right thing, they want to cut back on the use of fossil fuels to go green for the climate narrative, or you just believe that this is just for clean air. Like, listen, we can do things better. We've seen the oil and gas companies over the decades bring down their CO2 emissions because they can do it cleaner, they can do it better. And we should just expect companies to want to do things better. And I think that's a really good story to highlight when someone looks at mining and their immediate response is, oh my God, we can't do this. No one likes to then find the realization that you can't have your energy transition then. Or a lot of people don't realize that this entire energy transition, the foundation, the entire possibility of it even occurring is from mining. Now, other things that have come about is the U.S. Department of Energy. They've backed a couple of lithium plays. Now, if one was looking at the market today, you'd think, oh my God, the story of lithium is over. This has happened before. I'm sure, like all cycles within cycles, it'll happen again. But we see that there is big funding. And in this case, they've backed Next Gen Lithium Tech with a provisional investment of $500 million. They've earmarked for 2 DLE projects, which is really interesting. They're a novel extraction technology. They've got Albemarle's planned lithium metal anode plant. They're also funding. They've also looked at a couple other ones, Mitrachem and Lithium Industries, for funding awards this week. So they've got a lot of projects that are getting funded and being looked at that secures product of these critical metals for the future. And this is one of the great things where you see a lot of investment and people go, well, there's tons of inflation. Is this going to pay off? This is where it could. These efficiencies, these ability to get critical metals to end users in the U.S. Without having to ship all around the world, that's cuts down on cost, but it cuts down the use of bunker fuel and those kind of logistic, making the pathway clearer and easier. I imagine anyone that does economics or first year or looks at any kind of MBA, they would go, wait a second, why am I having the materials from Italy sent to China to be cut, to be then manufactured, to then maybe be assorted somewhere else and then sold in the U.S.? That's a lot of travel for a good, but yet it's still cheaper. That has to stop because the environmental impact of that is absurd. It's shocking. It's terrible. But also, this efficiencies of cheap labor, that we shouldn't really rely on that. I mean, I know that it makes the cost of things go exorbitantly high, but there's a better way of doing things. And I think when you look at the good sides of, say, the ESG movement, that's the good sides of saying, listen, we can't have these companies essentially using slave labor in places in the East to meet demands. We can't be sourcing nickel from companies that are just dumping into the ocean. That doesn't make any sense, especially if your narrative is on the climate and the environment, that you're saying, I'm going to clean up over here and look good. Meanwhile, I'm dumping over here. It doesn't make any sense. And most people are very much aware that what happens on the other side of the globe actually does impact, as far as oceans, as far as water, air quality. It has an impact. The sooner people can get over the NIMBY idea, the not my backyard, the better. And we've talked about that a number of times, not only for political reasons, to make sure that we've got a supply of critical metals, but because of that environmental impact. We want to be able to enforce regulation to make sure they're being done properly, to oversee them. And you can't, in the haze of some other country that isn't really cool with democracy, doesn't really care about your opinions, and is off on their own tangent, even if they're agreeing to things in terms, when they're very much doing something very different. So lots of good news there. We won't touch on the idea of the reported, tossed up idea of maybe a price floor for domestic critical metals. That's a very big hot button for anyone in economics. as well as a political button. That would be an entirely different show idea together, because I think that alone it would get people fired up, because I can see a case for both of those. And that's what makes arguments interesting, is having a viewpoint that, okay, it could work, but no, it can't work. So just leave that with you there. So tune in for when that's about to happen. But let's jump into a video right now. And this is Tom Steyer. This is just from today, from CNBC.
It's been a fantastic week of conversations, many of them energy and climate related. I know you've had similar conversations this week. Are you walking away from these meetings this week more optimistic, more constructive about the future?
Well, I came in pretty optimistic about the future, and I'm leaving even more optimistic. I think we're in the middle of a new industrial revolution. I think that the energy transition has a lot of momentum, so I feel very good about where we're going from a business standpoint.
What's encouraging you the most right now? What are you hearing that's giving you the most encouragement?
Well, I think the big thing that's happened is that clean energy and the new technologies are winning in the marketplace, and they're winning in the marketplace around the world. So we can talk, I think most people think that at some point we're going to start going through an energy transition, but the actual truth is we're right in the middle of a very fast energy transition around the world, and really nothing's going to stop.
We're also in the middle of an election cycle. Are you?
Let's pause here for a second. I wouldn't say that we're in the middle. I mean, we're definitely in it for sure, and that's why we're seeing a lot of inflation as well, and we're seeing a lot of this investment. It's going to be a long process. We're not nearly at the middle. We're at the very early innings of this thing. And I like it because it's a hopeful message. And they're going to talk about mining here in a second as well. But once again, he runs a climate fund. So you might kind of look and go, well, I'll discount that because he's obviously pitching his ideas and innovations moving forward. But once again, I encourage people to look at it. And yes, there's no end. You can see online the fights of the failures of wind and solar and plus and this and that. And just think of it more from the perspective of a tool belt. Wind can't work everywhere, even offshore or onshore, because the reliance on whether the wind is blowing, that's challenging. But there are places where there's consistent wind. Great. Why not use that there? Sun as well. Availability to, solar is obviously much, much more effective in some places than other places, and fair enough. So you see this divide a lot of times in arguments online and with people, is that, oh, well, you can't do this here, and that's why solar doesn't work. It's like, well, it doesn't have to work everywhere. And sometimes the messaging from more of the leftist climate thing is that everything's going to be wind and solar, which is patently absurd. It's all just going to be this type of renewable. That's it. That I would say anything's possible, but exceptionally unlikely. But in any event, is the part of the issue becomes, well, how much are you funding this thing to make this happen? And it's quite a bit. But once again, depending on where your take on things are, the trade-off might be beneficial. The numbers to try to find what really savings in CO2 is pretty challenging and very debatable. But regardless, I think there's many ways that you could look at this energy transition. And I always refer to it as an energy transition to remove this climate discussion, because that is mostly politics than anything else. And I know people don't like to hear that, but there is a lot of politics involved in that side of things that isn't based on science as much as people would like to think it is. And that's controversial on itself. But regardless, you're going to need to have a steady stream, and which you've seen, a huge buildup of oil and gas in the U.S. It's increased over the last few years. And my argument has always been, if you could try to convince a lot of the developing world to use liquid natural gas and get off coal, that would be a huge win. If you'd also just got places up so that they have energy, which is really wealth, to stop burning biomass or wood, that's a huge problem. Burning wood is awful for the environment. So that's a smaller number, but would be very beneficial to have that. Let's watch the rest of this video, though.
Kamala Harris, in her 82-page economic policy document, was actually touting U.S. record fossil fuel production.
I really think that the Harris-Walz campaign is trying to talk about energy and meet voters where they are, which is about economics. We know that Kamala Harris has been a strong advocate of clean energy for decades. We know that Governor Walz has a very strong climate record. But when they're talking to voters on the campaign trail, it's not about what you want to talk about. It's what they are able to hear. And what everybody in the United States is worried about right now is economics, is about us succeeding, is about jobs and costs. And that's what they're talking about. And I think that's entirely appropriate.
If that is accurate, which I think you do, everyone is talking about this, then why put the brakes on some projects that could fuel all of this?
Before we get into that, let's stop here for a second, because this is important. We get into some of this question we ask all the time. So I'll just leave it at that before. And I don't want to get into the politics thing, but I will say that my view of the left side, yes, they have appreciated nuclear. Finally, it's taken decades. They seem to be for it. They are definitely willing to fund the solar. They're willing to fund certain things. They're not necessarily huge advocates for mining, but maybe they'll come around. That would be a very, very positive. But the Republicans are just as much as well. So to make it seem like there's some sort of divide here, no, there isn't. The Trump or Republican side, whatever you want to call it, they've been exceptionally strong advocates of critical metals. So to make it seem like there's a distinction there, or that things might be stymied because of what's happening here with the U.S., no, it's not going to happen. He is right. This is a freight train moving forward, but all sides agree. Like, it's getting done. The difference is the narrative of the kind of the leftist side saying we're not doing oil and gas anymore, even though we see they very much have been. Whereas Trump is out there saying we're going to be fracking. So one, you could just say one's just a bit more honest than the other. And that, I think, is a stronger message to say we are transitioning. We should be weaning ourselves off, but we don't want to cause ourselves economic distress. There isn't any rush or need to be doing that. And if everyone got on the same page to that yes, we should all be doing things better. We should want clean air. These projects in mining, whether for lithium, whether for graphite, for nickel, you name it, these are long projects. They're long to get going. They're large. It takes a while to find them. And even when you find them, you have to get through permitting. We need to address all those problems. And that means that oil and gas is still going to be pumping just as much. So people have to accept that. Also realizing that the likes of BP and Shell, they are huge funders of green initiatives. They're not ignorant to the notion that there is a transition going on. So people also need to be reminded of that, that they are huge funders in it. And to think of it as it's a transition. The thought of we have to stop using this today, that's absurd, especially when it's a message geared only towards the West, and the East is allowed to do whatever they want. And that's a conversation it's only covered in kind of the alternative spaces like ourselves, or any of the newsletter writers in the mining space. They'll talk about that it's a one-way conversation where we're not supposed to look at, say, the increase of use of coal in China, in India, and whatnot. And then when someone does admit it, they go, oh, well, it's because of colonialism, and you guys stole this and that, and you got a head start. So you go, oh, so it's not about the environment anymore. What this is a political argument. And that tends to be what it devolves into very rapidly. And then that's when the confusion between, well, are you doing this for the environment then? Is this what this is about? Or is this about something else? And it's the same thing when we brought up with why are you putting tariffs on electric vehicles? And also in the US, why are they putting an outright ban on electrical systems that will use chips from China into any EV? If we're going through a massive crisis, a world-ending crisis, and we need to work together to solve this, and those are the solutions, you start to realize, well, maybe there isn't an urgency. Maybe there's a lot of politics as much as there is narrative here. So let's jump into the rest of it.
CEO yesterday, who basically said it was the Biden administration who put a pause on a mega copper mine in Arizona. Part of this has to do with politics.
I know that there's a lot of talk about critical minerals, and I know that people are pointing out different ways that this revolution can be slowed or you can lose its momentum. And I believe all of those conversations are overblown. I believe that, in fact, what we're going through is a huge business transformation that it has amazing momentum. Will there be problems with it about permitting and the grid and critical minerals? Absolutely, and people talk about them all the time.
Sure.
But they're missing the big picture, which is if you look at 2023, globally, 83% of new electricity generation was renewable.
Okay,
was
stop here for a
anybody
second.
doing that?
Okay, this I think is very misleading. For one, it's possible, but I think it's I think it's fair to question that very quickly, because one would think like, oh wow, we've really made this transition. You go, well, no, that what he's saying is new energy projects that have been funded. So well, this is a whole other kind of veering path to go off of. There's been specific guidelines, and if we bring up this report here, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, this is the World Economic Forum UN agreement to basically target banks to not fund oil and gas. So if you say yes, we've got a global initiative that goes from top down politicians to investment banks saying you can't fund these projects anymore, otherwise you're going to get a negative ESG score, you're going to get this and that. Well, then yes, 80% of all of your new projects that you funded will be solar and wind. But how much is that generating though? So what is that actually generating? And we don't have time for today to get into that full details of what is it actually generating, but you have to put that into perspective. The number one by far, hold on, I'm just looking at the America's Electricity. This is a report, America's Electricity Generation Capacity 2024 update. Still by a long shot. You're looking at the U.S. is nearly 1.3 million megawatts of generation capacity. And the vast majority of that is, of course, natural gas, 44%. 16% is still coal. 11.6 wind, 8% hydro, 8% nuclear, 7.75% solar. So we've seen a lot better efficiencies in natural gas, which has been very helpful. We've seen a drastic reduction in coal, which is great. I'm all for it. I just would like to see, a lot of the developing nations not use coal. That's where the messaging should be prompted towards. And there has been an increase in wind, hydro to some extent, and solar, because once again, this is a tool belt, and that's great. This is good news. Now, I don't want to get into, well, how much did it cost us to get this? Because that may not be the greatest story, but that's fine, because I think if everyone looked at this fairly and said, can we have cleaner air? Can we do things better? And we could meet in that middle to do this transition a little bit better, maybe, and not be so divisive. I think you could get most people on side with it, and you'd have to really tone down a lot of the climate alarmism. That's for sure, because they've unfortunately taken something good and made it into an ideology, almost like a religion, and that has done as much harm to it than it has any good. Let's then move on quickly just to the finalize. Listen to the last few minutes of that video. Oh, sorry, we got rid of the video. Okay, let's move on from there. What I wanted to jump on as well is just very, very briefly is when we were talking about oil and gas too. You see, I think the perspectives from a lot of the investment banks was that oil was going to be somewhere around $94. I think I read that somewhere, like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all had very ambitious 24 targets. And it's not there. I mean, you can see it. And what's interesting, I'd like to see your input. If we look back, this is an older article from BNN. China's record oil imports from Asia point to Iran flows. Is that there's an undercurrent of discussion about these BRICS nations that the reason why oil is down is because they're trading on their own platform. And this article does seem to suggest that that's the case, and they're not reporting it. They're choosing not to settle there. They're going to create their own system. And if we start seeing that, imagine the chaos when this mirrored system is being developed, being tested, trades are being done outside. We have no visibility to it. We're not asked to join it because they want something distinctly separate. Tell me what your thoughts are if you believe that it's gone that far, or if they're just finding loopholes to be able to trade in certain different ways. Very interesting conversation. It certainly makes the case for BRICS a lot stronger. It also makes the case for precious metals much stronger as well. And maybe that's why we're seeing that people are saying, oh, the risk-free rate is, the T-bill rate is 2-point-something%, inflation's down, but yet still gold and silver are charging forward. Just in the last couple of weeks has been charging forward. There's something going on here. The market's telling us something. And I think the sooner the mainstream catches on, two things. They're going to realize that this is happening. And that could then mean the floodgate of funds and money entering into precious metals, into mining, really ramps up. This is our hope. This has been the thesis for a long period of time. I'm sure many of you that could be thinking it's starting. And I would certainly say when you listen to some of the excellent speakers out there, whether it's Rick Rule, if you're listening to Kitco, the Metals Investor Forum, amazing speakers, lots of different opinions and viewpoints and perspectives that are all saying generally the same thing. They're on the cusp of this. It's happening now. It's always hard to tell the future, but it certainly seems like this is happening. And once that understanding from a mainstream perspective, because once again, mainstream, they don't invest in gold. The West does not invest in gold. It's very, very minute. There would be a floodgate of activity, and we would love to see that. And I think everyone can admit they don't see things calming down. I mean, I'd love to, but the Middle East is not calming down. Russia's not calming down. The tension between China and Taiwan is not calming down. The struggle for power in the West is not calming down. We're in a big state of flux. We're in an energy transition. There's so many things changing. We've got an AI transition. The capacity for us to deal with this much change is causing enormous stress, not only on our social systems, on our political spectrum and systems, but on us just in relationships and just dealing with the scope of change that our mind has to come to terms with. And it is happening. We're in it the first couple innings. It's going to continue. And yes, it's stressful. There's negatives. It's not going to be easy. But if we kind of envision a more hopeful future where we're going to get through it, and we are, I mean, let's be honest, we're going to get through this. It's just going to be tough. If we have that long-term vision of something that looks better and brighter and a more hopeful, that's exciting. And that gets us through a tougher day. So let me know what you think, what your thoughts are. I'll wrap it up for just kind of giving a little bit of pitch out here for Red Cloud Financial Services and Media. They've got a fall mining showcase. It's the 2024 fall showcase, October 16th and 17th in Toronto. We're going to be there, which is great. We're one of the sponsors of the event. We're going to be interviewing a ton of companies. Take a look at the Red Cloud at the event itself, and take a look at some of the companies. And if there's companies that you see in there and you like, and you want some questions asked, hey, I'll ask them. Rifle them off to me at andrew@themarketmindset.ca. Happy to answer those for anybody. We really appreciate all the support, all the comments. We like to keep things spicy, so keep it coming. And we look forward to a beautiful weekend here in Vancouver, and we'll talk to you again next week.